Eli, as is my custom, I'm going to begin with an introduction. Now, I know you for all these many years as Eli Acosta, but what's your full name?
My full name is Eliasib Acosta, or Eliasib Acosta, if you Anglo-Saxonize it.
Mm-hmm. Where'd that name come from? How did you get that?
Eliasib is biblical. It's in the Bible. In English, it has an H in it between the S and the I. So it would be Eliashib. In Spanish, which is the way I write it, it's Eliasib. And then Acosta.
Uh-huh.
So Eliasib is one of the forms of Eli that you find in the Bible. Elijah is another one. Elias is a third, and so forth.
Have you ever used that part of your name as a, I don't want to say as a role model, but as an image to reach for? Or have you ever thought about people being? I know the Native American culture used to name their children after animals or certain elements in nature, because they either saw that in the child or to give the child the power of that. I wondered.
Well, what I did was I took the translation of the word Eliasib, and it means God or Lord, and I kind of, without trying to be sacrilegious or anything, and being respectful of the kids' religions, I would say to them that it means Lord or God, and so that, since there was a God before me, I'm God Junior. But if that offends you from a religious point of view to say that I'm God Junior, you can call me Lord Acosta. So that was used as an icebreaker, so to speak, to get kids to
that's great. That's a great
kind of go with the flow.
Yeah. You hear, I'm sure we've both heard in many southern communities, they talk about a youngster growing up in the system and going on, succeeding, going to college, and then coming back to work in the community. You've done that.
Yes, I have. I went to Brentwood High School, graduated in 1962. I went to Manhattan College in the Bronx for 4 years, and in 1966, I started working at East Junior, which is now East Middle. And I've been working in the Brentwood School District for these 32 years.
Yeah. This has taken a considerable portion of your life, right?
Yes, it has.
I shouldn't say it's taken. You've also given.
Well, it's a give and take.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your mom, because I'm going to assume that your mom and dad had a good deal of input into naming you. What was your mother's name? Her maiden name, her full name?
Her maiden name was Martinez. Unfortunately, my mother and father I never got to know very well. I lost my mother when I was 4, and I was raised by an aunt and an uncle. And I came to the United States from Puerto Rico at the age of 4 with my mother and my older brother. And the situation was that she passed away when I was home with her one day, and then I was raised by an aunt and an uncle after that. And we lived in Brooklyn for several years. And in 1955, we came out to live in Brentwood.
1955 with your aunt and uncle?
With my aunt and uncle.
What part of Brooklyn did you live in?
We lived in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn on Union Street, between Clinton and Henry. And it was a 6-floor tenement. I lived on the 5th floor.
Walk up?
It was a walk up, 229 Union Street. And I lived with them until we came out here to Long Island, to Brentwood. When I came to Brentwood, the Soundling building wasn't built yet.
Yes.
The R.O.B.S building was in the process of being thought of. It was a farm back here.
Sure.
And 5th Avenue was a 2-lane road.
Yeah. I want to get back to that because you have some precious memories of this community before it became the Brentwood that people know today. Tell me about your present family situation.
I have 4 children. 2 are my natural children. I have 2 from my second marriage. And my first marriage ended in divorce. My second marriage, my wife passed away in 86 of breast cancer. And as you know, I married Marge.
Yes.
She's my 3rd wife. And so I have one child from my first marriage. That's Lisa. She's a 1988 graduate of Brentwood High School, R.O.B.S building. She recently, a year ago, blessed us with our first grandchild,
Oh,
a boy,
wonderful, wonderful.
Adam Maxwell Pilgrim. And my other children are older than Lisa. They're from my second wife's first marriage, James, Patrick, and Christine Ann. And the youngest is Elizabeth Ann. And Lisa is, of course, Lisa Dolores. And those are the 4 children.
And the 4 children are living with you and with Marge now. They're all at home.
No, just one.
Just one.
The youngest, Elizabeth. She's gonna be a junior at University of Maryland at College Park in September. The oldest, Christine, is married. She lives in Shirley. She is an underwriter, if I remember correctly, for Allstate. My son Jimmy is a teacher at Rocky Point. He'll be working at Ward Melville High School next year. Lisa works for the Long Island AIDS Coalition, LIAC. And Elizabeth,
Recently named after the dissolution of LILCO, we could say.
No. Long Island AIDS Coalition is
Long Island AIDS Coalition.
Yeah.
Oh, where's my head?
LIAC.
I'm thinking, yes.
You're thinking
yes.
of LILCO.
Yeah, I'm thinking LILCO, but the new name is something else, and I confuse it. I'm sorry.
Market Span is the new
Market
name for
Span.
LILCO.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But it's a support group for people who have AIDS in their families. And she's a caseworker for that.
Wow, there's a big wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a talk about a labor of love too.
Mm-hmm.
And I had occasion to speak with your wife, with Marge, the other day, and I gathered right away that you have some very close family contact, because she at the moment had a grandchild in her arms and was taking care of the baby.
All right, we do some of the babysitting.
Great, wonderful.
Right, while Lisa goes to work.
Great.
Her husband works for Nike, and the outlet out in Riverhead, and so we do some babysitting.
The personalities, the interests, or the talents of all those children. You've mentioned certain things right away that I see for, however, whether it's genetic or learned, you've got another teacher in the family, and you've got, what do you see in the way of interests or abilities, maybe, or the difference, the uniqueness of each of the kids?
Knocking on wood,
Yes.
I've been very lucky, and we've had 4 children who have turned out to be decent citizens. You know, I like to think that we worked hard to try to do what we did,
Right.
and but you know, they're all productive citizens. You know, they're basically decent people, and they're caring and considerate of other people, generally speaking. Nobody's perfect. We all have our faults, but I consider myself very lucky for adult children who
Yes.
who are loving and caring, and what more can you ask for?
That's absolutely right. Well, let's see. You've answered. I'm thinking fast because you've answered several of the questions that I wanted to. Here's one that it will bring us into another venue here. Where were you born in Puerto Rico? What part of Puerto Rico were you?
I was born on the west coast of Puerto Rico in a city called Mayagüez. It's in the northwest corner of Puerto Rico, and I lived just outside of the city limits in a small town to the north called Rincon, which means like nook or cranny.
Oh, yeah.
And or corner.
Uh-huh.
And it's a very sleepy town. And when I was little, I remember only 2 or 3 things from growing up in Puerto Rico. One was one time falling from an area where the driveway was to like a ravine.
Mm.
And the other time, I remember my older brother and I chasing field mice in the fields behind the house.
Oh, wow.
We lived adjacent to a farm, and I don't remember this, but I remember my mother telling me about the fact that my brother was out chasing the field mice and he would hit them with his heel of his foot to kill them.
Uh-huh.
And so that and the wind blowing in the breeze of the sugar cane,
Oh.
those are the memories I have of
Have you
growing
ever
up in
been
Puerto
back
Rico.
there? Have you ever gone back to visit?
Yes. My youngest daughter hassled me for a while about bringing her back to my homeland, so to speak.
Yes.
And we did that several years ago, back in 94.
Oh, I'll bet it
I think it was
changed,
1994. Yeah, it's very, very different.
huh?
The big metropolitan centers like San Juan and Rio Piedras, they're all, very similar to your normal, how should I say, tourist attractions that you would find in any other part of the Caribbean. And but once you get out of the the major cities, the situation becomes one of it's semi-tropical, but it can be just like any other suburban setting you would probably find here in the United States.
Really?
So the
Has
roads
there
are
been
all
a lot of sprawl, a lot of moving out?
yeah,
and building?
precisely. Yeah, it's still somewhat rural and semi-rural in areas, but there's a lot of suburban sprawl.
Yes. Your birth mother, what was her full name?
Her first name was Rosa. Her second name was Maria, and her maiden name was Martinez. Rosa Maria Martinez.
And was her family also? Were her parents born in Puerto Rico? Or
you see, I was raised by the aunt and uncle, and we didn't talk too much about, my parents' parents, but I got a little bit about what they were about. My father's name was Victor.
That's what I was going to ask you about your own family history, and then of course your aunt and uncle become your family, so their history as well. I wonder if you're aware of all of the
to some extent, yeah. My mother, as a matter of fact, I looked very much like my mother, from what I can remember. And I'm probably a little fairer skinned than she is, but she was a little darker than I was. Her mother was a curious mixture of the real deep black skin that you find in some of your Caribbean peoples who are of the Indian ilk. But she had the long black straight hair that you find in your Native Americans.
Yes.
But her skin was as dark as any Afro-American you could find.
Wow.
It almost had like a blue tinge to it.
Yes.
I remember when I was a little boy, remarking, about how her skin almost seemed to be blue.
Wow. Yes. Yeah.
And my grandfather on my mother's side, he died before I was born, I think, because I don't remember ever meeting him. And I know very little about my father's family, other than, if I remember correctly, I was told he was born in Spain, and he married a Puerto Rican woman and fathered my father.
When you came to the city, was there a family? Was there a family cluster of other?
No, not really. My mother had a cousin who I went to live with after my mother passed away. So I was raised by my second cousin once removed, but I just refer to her as my aunt. And she was the only one that she knew of that was a relative that was here, because all the other relatives were in Puerto Rico. And after I came to the States and lost my mother, I lost track of the other relatives. When I got to be much older, I tried to find them again, so to speak. But I was very young. I didn't have very much money to go back and forth to Puerto Rico, and because trying to do it over the phone and trying to do it through records is a very difficult task. And although I did try to some extent, it was frustrating.
Yeah.
And so
when you mentioned you were 4 when your mother passed away?
Yes.
Now, and a few years later, you also lost your father, you said? Or?
Well, I think my father probably passed away in the middle 50s, but my mother and he were separated.
Okay.
And
Oh, so that's why you went to live with your
that's
aunt
why I
and
was
uncle
raised
at
by my
that
aunt and
time.
uncle, right?
How do you remember your dad, your biological father? Do you have any
I
memories
don't
of him?
really remember anything about him other than he was, he had like red hair and his hair was thinning.
Okay. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Say no more, right?
Yeah, say no more.
When I ask you, Eli, I hope you understand. I ask you about your biological parents, but you also had some, well, what I'll call real parents,
That's right.
who you grew up with,
Right.
and I want to ask you about them too, and I
Sure.
want to ask you to describe each of them.
Well, my aunt, who was my mother's cousin, her name was Luz Maria Bompart, Bompart, and her husband was Valentine, and he was from Venezuela, and of course my aunt was from Puerto Rico,
Mhm.
and they were very decent people,
Yes.
very, very religious. I was brought up in a Pentecostal home where, you went to church, several times a week and twice on Sunday, Sunday morning and Sunday evening. And, they gave me some very strong values, from the point of view of, religion and from the point of view of, fairness and things like that. Obviously, much of the things that involve my values probably as I grew up are attributable to them. But they were not well off. They both worked very hard, and it was not an easy time growing up because they had 3 children of their own.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask too. Then it became an
An
extended
family, precisely.
And how many kids were there of your generation?
There were 3 others of my generation.
Okay.
And Daniel was the oldest. And then there was Valentine, who was my age. He was about a week older than I was. And Israel was the youngest. And there were 2 other children, David and Samuel, but they were much, much older. And I remember when I was in elementary school, they were like, getting out of high school and going into the service. So
was there sufficient closeness or contact that I could ask you what you learned from them as role models or as
as I said,
big brothers
you're talking
or
about,
sisters?
you're talking about my siblings, my brothers.
Yes.
Well, I think we all kind of learned from each other as we went along.
Sure.
Valentine and I were about, the same age, and we were both very much into athletics. He played football and baseball with me when I was younger. Later on, when I became a junior in high school, I started getting involved with track and field, and he stayed on with the football and the baseball. We both tried wrestling a little bit for Wade Cummings when we were sophomores. He stayed with it, I think, 1 more year into his junior year, but I only wrestled for 1 year, and I didn't really wrestle a full year. I had hurt my knee, so I had to stop. Israel was, several years younger, and I guess to some extent, Val and I were a role model for him. And, my older brother Daniel, he was, about 4 or 5 years older. So, we lived in the same household, but, you're kind of like in your own little world,
Sure.
trying to do well in school and getting involved in sports.
As we both
like
know
that.
too, that sometimes when you're younger, just a couple of years different makes a world of difference in terms of interests.
Right, and the friends you hang out with, and
out with.
what they do and stuff like that.
What influenced your choice to become a teacher?
Well,
or should I say who?
Yeah. Originally, I had aspirations of, becoming a doctor, when I was younger in school.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, 8th or 9th grade. And then I realized later on, after I got to be a sophomore or a junior, as to the kind of course that it would get involved to go into college. And I said, well, I don't think I'll be able to do that because after college, I got to do medical school, and that costs even more. So, that kind of got put out of the way. I wasn't thinking about the idea that maybe you could get scholarships. But So I said to myself, well, I want to do something. I want to go to college. I want to, get a decent job so I can support my family and so forth and so on. And Bill Kurlick, who was my 7th grade shop teacher and homeroom teacher, and his wife, Judy, they were just starting out in the Brentwood School District. And I saw, the kind of lifestyle that they had. And I said, well, gee, that seems like
Looks pretty good.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. And then I got involved with, playing baseball and, soccer and other things. And, I enjoy the sports. And I said, well, gee, this is something I'd like to do. But I kind of still always had in the back of my mind wanting to become a doctor, a pediatrician. And the more I got into high school, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, the more I enjoyed the sports, the more I said to myself, well, being a doctor and being a coach or a mentor for kids playing games, that's not going to fit in. So I said, well, maybe teaching might be easier to do in terms of the coaching. And the subjects I enjoyed the most in high school were science and social studies. Science was the most fun for me because it was the most interesting, but I really enjoyed social studies, a lot more in history. And I guess that a lot had to do with, the teachers I had early on. I had Stan Yankowski in 10th grade.
For goodness sake.
I had Milt Seiler in 11th grade, and I had Vinnie Presno in 12th grade. And, of course, you're familiar with all the names.
Sure, absolutely.
And, part of the reason why I had such an interest in that area was, because of the fine teachers that they were. Ruth Rosenthal, was my teacher in 8th grade in earth science. And, she was the one that, was most influential in my becoming a science teacher. And, I've been eternally grateful to her for that. She probably has never heard those words spoken, but
well, I hope as a result of this conversation, she
will. And I know she knows the sentiment.
Yes.
And but she may have heard my saying that to other people, and it's been repeated to her. Yeah. But it's just one of those things that when you work with somebody or you meet somebody again, at a function of one kind or another, and you always want to say this, you walk away and you don't get to say it, and you forget, and you say, God, yes. When am I ever going to get to do this?
How wonderful for all of the people whose names you've mentioned that they could see you becoming the teacher that you became over the years. Words didn't have to be said. They saw you demonstrated your values and your gifts by being here. That's what I meant early on when I said you came back. And who were your best friends growing up? And when I say growing up, I guess you did a lot of that when you built a nest here in the community, when your family settled out here.
Yeah. Well, growing up in high school, I was kind of a loner, believe it or not. I palled around with different people, but I was kind of a loner, because, we didn't have much at home. We were lower middle income. A lot of the things that, some of the other kids did, their parents had a little bit more money, I was kind of left out of. But most of the people who I palled around with regularly were athletes, people who I played ball with or people who I ran track and field or played soccer with. And, Eddie Rosario, Joe Montalvo, Lefty Martinez, Danny Alejandro, Ray Perez.
Ray Perez. May he rest in peace.
God rest his peace. God rest his soul. Benny Gonzalez, his cousin. Phil Barrero. Many of these names were athletes that went to school with me, and we played ball and whatever. Ray Traylor, one of the best athletes that Brentwood High School ever produced.
Yeah. Do you remember the room where you slept as a kid through that period? Could you describe it?
Well, I shared the room with my other cousin, Val, and it was an attic dormer bedroom, so the ceilings, the pitch, the gables of the ceilings,
I had one of those myself for a period of time, And
it was one of those things where with the quarters were cramped, but we had 3 squares to eat every day, a warm place to be at, and
Were you assigned chores? Did you have
oh yeah,
jobs to do?
yeah.
What'd you have to do?
My chores basically involved, taking care of, my own personal laundry and,
Okay.
putting out the garbage and sometimes helping with the dishes at night or helping to cook. Sometimes, involving doing some, work around the house, gardening or whatever. So, we each had chores to do.
Do you remember your first paying job, the first job for which you earned some?
My first paying job was when I was a little boy living in Brooklyn. I was passing by a laundromat, and we were walking back from school. It was on a Friday afternoon in the springtime, and the guy who worked in the laundromat was outside trying to do some stuff, and he was trying to bring out something to the curb. I don't remember what it was, something in the garbage container, one or another, and he was having a real difficult time of it, and he hurt his back a little bit, so he asked myself and one of my friends if we could help him. So we helped him to bring it to the curb, and he was walking back in pain. And, like when we were walking away, we were looking at him, and, we kept walking, and in about 10 seconds later, he said, "Hey, guys, hold on." And so he offered us a job, helping him, do some of the things around the laundromat. And so we came by the next morning, after I got permission from my aunt and my uncle to do that. And that was my first paying job.
Where was that laundromat? Where was
It was on Henry Street between Sackett and between Sackett and Union Street.
Okay.
It's 1 block. Let's see, I'm trying to think of the trench now. The trench runs east and west on the BQE.
Yes.
So, no, I'm sorry, it runs north and south at that point. It runs north and south. So it was on the right side, which would make it the east side of the trench. So Hicks Street is on the trench, then comes Henry Street, then comes Clinton. And so it was on Hicks Street, on Henry Street between Sackett and Union, and it was on the east side of the street.
Have you gone back to that old neighborhood a lot?
Several times. The building is no longer there. It's now a 2-family home.
Yes.
And some of the stores have changed, but some of the other stores are still there. And also the 6th precinct is still there. The NYPD 76th precinct is still there. And
do you also have the experience of going back to an area where you grew up and seeing it much smaller than you remember it, or is that not part of?
This is going to really blow your mind. I graduated from Brentwood High School in 1962 when Fred Weaver was principal. And yesterday I was proctoring a RCT in reading with Mike Bannon. And who should walk in but Fred Weaver with one of his evening high school students. And for the life of me, I don't remember Fred Weaver ever being that short.
Yes.
But he is very short.
Yes, he is.
And of course, being older, he's a little shorter now because he's stoop-shouldered. But, I'm not that big. I'm 5'8.5". But I remember him being bigger than me when I was in high school, but apparently that was not right.
Yes.
So, things are right. And of course, Stan Yankowski, imagine Stan Yankowski, who's about 6'3", 6'4".
That's right.
And so when I was in high school, he must have seemed like he played for the New York Giants.
You bet.
Yeah, things very different.
Is there a family holiday, Eli, that you remember as being particularly a lot of fun?
I mean, when I was growing up?
Yeah, when you were growing up.
When I was growing up, probably, Christmas, the Christmas dinner, the ethnic food, the rice and pigeon peas, arroz con gandules.
Great. Yeah.
The ham or, the turkey or, whatever it was.
Food.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pasteles, which is like a meat pie. It's made with different vegetables, which are mashed. And they're filled with pork or beef, and very, very tasty.
Do you have a special memory attached to any of the seasons, growing up, that is unique to one or the other season, fall?
Probably the summer. We would wake up in the morning around 7:30. The alarm clock didn't turn off in one's head from getting up early every morning to go to school. And by 7:30, 7:45, we were on the baseball field here behind the R.O.B.S building playing ball because I lived on Stein Drive right here behind high school.
Where?
On Stein Drive right behind the high school.
Okay.
Yep. And so we'd be playing ball at 7:30, 7:45. You know, we'd break for lunch. Half an hour later, we're back out there playing till 5.
Jeez, yeah.
5:30,
Yeah.
we'd break for dinner.
Not bad.
And
That's
6:30, we'd come back on the field and play ball again until
the
we had to
light
go to
ran
church
out.
or something,
Okay,
you know,
yes.
come in for the night. But
You were very athletic then. You
yeah,
had a lot of
I
energy.
enjoyed athletics.
You mentioned before that you were a loner, or
Yeah.
would that describe? How would you describe yourself?
Well, you know, when I was with my friends, I was outgoing. You know,
Yes,
I had
okay.
an outgoing personality.
Yeah.
But you know, other than the kids who I palled around with in terms of playing sports, there weren't very many other people that I hung out with. I didn't, I wasn't one of those kind of guys that just went out and ran the streets or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you might call me a homeboy. As
Okay.
kids tend to use that expression.
Yeah.
And so I never was one to be roaming the streets late at night. I was either at home after it was dark, or I was playing basketball at a local gym,
Mm-hmm.
or I was on the way home from having played baseball.
Having done something.
But when it was dark, we came home. We didn't hang out.
I'm not sure if you told me this before, but what was the first school you attended? It was.
Yes, the first school I attended was, when I came to Brentwood, was the Annex. If you look at the library from
Mm-hmm.
3rd Avenue, there's like a portion of it that doesn't look like it fits. It's a mason and brick and concrete building, and it was called the Annex because it was an addendum to the the elementary schools that were in the area at the time. And
There
it
were
eventually became the administration building.
how many? There were only a few classes in there at that time.
I don't know if you remember Louis Latito.
I didn't know Mr. Latito.
Okay, but he was my teacher. Another one was Henry Maslinoff. He was a Korean veteran who had a couple of fingers missing, but he was my other teacher there, and spent 5th and 6th grade there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had Mr. Maslinoff in 5th grade and Mr. Latito in 6th grade. And then in 7th grade, the R.O.B.S building opened up. And Richie Edwards and myself were the first 7th grade class and the only 7th grade class in the R.O.B.S building, because the next year they opened up South Middle, which was then South Junior, and all the 7th grade kids in the district went there.
That was during some real growth spurts in this.
Yeah, 1957, 58, and then 58, 59. Excuse me, let me see, that was 55. Yeah, 57, I guess. 56, 57. And then in 8th grade, we were the only 8th grade ever in the R.O.B.S building, because the next year all the 7th and 8th graders went to South, and I don't know how shortly thereafter they opened up the North Junior, but we were the only 9th grade at
So
the
you,
R.O.B.S
every
building.
time you made a movie, you were the first.
Yep, and only
First.
until they became 10th, 11th, and 12th,
Yes.
and we were the first 10th grade class there, and that had gone through the 3 grades. We weren't the first 10th grade class there, actually, because there were other 10th grade classes there, but we were the first 10th grade class there that had been there in 8th, 9th, 8th, and 7th. So we were the first 10th grade class, I guess you could say, that had 3 years experience in the building.
Well, you had to be one of the first graduating classes from the high school.
Well, the first
One of
graduating
the
class,
first.
I think, was 1957.
Yeah, but I say
Yeah.
one of the first.
Oh, yeah, right. We graduated 5 years later.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, 62.
Now, you certainly have already indicated that you remember your teachers. You remember some
Yes.
of the people from your first elementary school, and
Well, that was my elementary years. The early elementary years were in Brooklyn, but my elementary.
what school did you go to in Brooklyn?
PS 13. It's not just a series of row houses. No longer
gone.
there. It's gone too. Yeah, it was between Henry and Hicks on DeGraw Street. Gone.
So then by the time you came up to the high school, some of the people who you had as teachers most of them, with the exception of Fred Weaver, who was in Brentwood Institution,
Mm-hmm.
who was still working in the evening school, they have since all retired, or
Yes.
for the most part, I
Yeah,
guess.
I don't think there is one that is still teaching that I was here for a student. I think the last one would have been Ralph Ruggiero. Nope, I take it back. Ralph came in '63, I think. Clem Stanzik. Clem
Okay.
Stanzik was in
Yes.
his first year teaching.
Okay.
He was my 12th year English teacher.
Yeah.
And he retired about
Just a
3 or
couple
4
of
years
years
ago.
ago,
Yeah.
Eli, you've done a lot of reading in your life. Is there a book that you can point to that you might say, this really had a profound effect on my life, this book?
One book.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many books that all of us have.
When I was in 7th and 8th grade, I used to take the books out of the library that had to do with sports, football, and basketball, baseball. Those were the three main ones. And I was always reading sports books all the time. And I don't remember if it was Ruth Rosenthal or a guy who was my teacher either the year before or the year after Ruth. His name was Eugene Bradley. And he told me something about a book called Leningen versus the Ants. And it was a book about a plantation in Brazil that had been run over by ants and how this guy tried to fight through the advancing army of ants, 20 square miles of ants, 2 miles by 10 miles. And it wasn't so much what the book was saying, but the drama of the book. The impact that it had on me was that, I became interested in living things. And I started to read more about living things in biology and wound up becoming a biology major. So Leningen versus the Ants is the book.
Wow. The reason for the question is that Eva, our librarian, had asked me to ask this question of people because she wants to put books in the library that had a profound effect.
Great book.
Right.
Leningen versus the Ants.
You mentioned that. Well, who interviewed you for the job here
in Brentwood? Ruth Rosenthal and George Pittman. Ed Murphy.
Was this all one interview, or
Tommy Marcello? Those are the 4 people I think that were involved.
or was it a couple of interviews?
It was in the administration building.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth, Tommy, and I think George and Ed were all there. All 4 of them there, I think.
Now, when you came to Brentwood with the family, Brentwood was still a very rural community. What do you remember about the Brentwood that used to be?
Oh, the high school complex was a farm. I was just talking to my students the other day about where the tennis courts are by the R.O.B.S building. There's a little road there that goes to the back of the administration building. Well, on either side of that road, there were some tall pine trees that were growing. They must have been, well, they seemed to be like 150 to 200 feet high. Obviously, they weren't that high, but they must have been 75 to 80 feet tall at least. And one of the things I used to remark about was how if you could go back and tell a story about what Brentwood looked like, those pine trees could probably give you a real good idea, because they're right behind the administration building, which was our school, for a large part of the history of Brentwood. And when we first came to Brentwood, I think you went to school up through the 8th grade in that building. And then, of course, I think for 9th grade, you had to go to Bayshore High School.
Yeah.
And
now, did you ever attend classes in the village? You never?
I went to the annex in 5th and 6th grade. And then in 7th grade, they opened up the R.O.B.S building. So I never attended the village school.
Okay.
No. But those big trees, those big pine trees, if anybody could tell a story about what Brentwood was like, it would be those. You know, you hear the old story about if, you know, you could be a
Yes.
fly on a wall, or
Yes.
trees
Yes.
could tell stories about,
Yes.
you know, the different kinds of traffic that have come down this road over the many years. And I used to tell that story to my students in biology about how, you know, there are some living things on Earth that are very, very old. The 4,000-year-old sequoia trees in California. Well, right here in Brentwood, we had up until about maybe.
Wonder why they were removed.
Yeah, I don't know. I
What
don't know.
decision?
Maybe because they needed the area for the fields. But I always thought it was a shame.
Yes, you bet. Now, you mentioned teaching biology. What other subjects did you teach for your tenure?
I taught when I first started. I started in the junior high school, and I taught general science 7 and 8, and biology to the ninth graders in the honors classes, and that was at East and at North. And then I came to the high school and I taught biology primarily, and for a period of time I taught chemistry, and every once in a while when they needed a fill-in for a math course, I would teach a math course. But those are the courses I taught.
Who did you work with during those early years when you first started teaching?
When I first started, most of those people have since retired.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them have passed away. George Smith in biology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. Henny Rosenthal was still alive.
Yes.
Bill Nissie, who went over toward Melville. Harold Berger, who went over to Syosset, has since passed away.
There was a time, you're mentioning these names, and I'm remembering back to a time when there was an awful lot of turnover. People came, they got 2 or 3 years experience, they cut their teeth in Brentwood, and then they were gone.
Yep.
That changed.
Yes.
And we grew, we developed roots, and we developed an identity as a system, and people like yourself, and I guess myself too, we stayed and watched the whole community and the whole school system grow around us. Were there other assignments, activities, or program involvements over the year you either volunteered for or asked to shepherd along the way?
When I was in high school, I started getting involved in sports with baseball primarily because that was my first love. And when I was a little boy, I dreamed about being a baseball player, but, I was too skinny and not strong enough to realize that, getting a baseball scholarship was like pie in the sky. And I kept dreaming about that and, hopefully, but I knew it wasn't a realistic dream. And in my sophomore year in high school, and in my freshman year in high school in gym class, Roy Rapp and Wayne Cummings and Frank Brusca, they were my gym teachers, and we would do things on the track like they would have a mile run and a half mile run. And I remember in ninth grade I was asked to run in the half mile and in the mile. And in gym class with sneakers on our old cinder track, which was really very, very slow because the sand was very sandy-like. It was very loose cinders. I ran 2:22 in the half mile and 5:22 in the mile. And, Roy Rapp tried to get me to run cross country, I guess. But, I was playing soccer at the time, so I wouldn't hear of it. And then, of course, in the spring, I played baseball. And then, at the end of my sophomore year, I guess Dick Simmons came into the district.
Yeah. Yes,
and
okay.
In the fall of my junior year, after having played soccer, I was in the pool in the R.O.B.S building for one reason or another, and Dick Simmons came up to the high school. I guess he was looking for recruits to, get involved with for his spring track team. And, he talked to me, for a period of time, and I told him I'd think about it. And he convinced me to come out for a track as a junior. Ironically, the year before, I had played on the baseball team, and part of the way through the season, I was moved up to the varsity from the JV, not because I was a good hitter, but because I guess I was a decent fielder, and they had lost their shortstop for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so I played the varsity baseball the second half of my sophomore year, and then the following year, in my junior year, when, of course, I was expected to be on the team again in the spring, I made the announcement to the baseball team and the guys who I played ball with and to the baseball coach that I was going to be running track. And when they asked me why, I said, well, I think maybe this is something I'd like to try. And, apparently Dick Simmons saw something in me that, was worthwhile pursuing, and that was the beginning.
Yeah. And then when you were yourself a teacher and a coach,
Mm-hmm.
did you find that most of your activities evolved around sports? And
Well, we had the primary responsibility is the classroom, and we worked at that. But after school, after school, other activities I got involved with was coaching. Primarily track and field and cross country. But on occasions, I would coach baseball, and besides doing the coaching for track and field during the regular school year, at some time I also was involved with the chess club. Kids,
that's right. I remember. Yes, I remember.
Kids wanting to play chess in my study hall. I would encourage them to play, and I would play with them sometimes.
Great.
And I did that also at the junior high. And when they came to the high school from the junior high, especially from North, there was this one young boy who wanted to get involved. He had said something about the fact that there was a chess league, and could I sponsor them? I said, well, I coach track and field. I'm not going to be able to do this. But, they conned me into doing that, and for about 7 or 8 years, I was doing both. And
what happened to that? Did somebody take that after you, or did it just kind of...
a couple of people tried to do it, but then it just fell by the wayside because it was an unpaid position.
Yes, sure.
And
speaking of that, by the way, that in addition to doing all of what you were doing, you also, if you were like most of us, you had another job. You had a part-time job. What did you do? What was your other...
Besides coaching after school, I would do evening high school. I taught a high school equivalency course, first in English and then later on in Spanish. Joe Bassa, who was at South Junior, he taught the math part.
Joe Basso also used to do the citizenship and over at Pilgrim Psychiatric.
Yeah, I did that with him also. Donald Algrove, you remember him?
I remember that.
He became a legislator later on.
Yes.
I think he was a Suffolk County legislator from Comac. He did the English. I'm trying to think who did the social studies. I did the science. Joe did the math. So I guess maybe Donald did the reading comprehension, English, and social studies combination. And later on, when I did it in Spanish, it was myself and Bernie LeBron.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And then I gave that up eventually.
Did the training that you received prior to walking into the classroom, did you think that it adequately prepared you? Is there something that you would like to see happening today that would give young teachers a leg up on some of their introductions to teaching that maybe you and I didn't have?
Well, when I first came to Brentwood in 1955, it was, a school district in
transition,
very much in transition, but growing very, very quickly. And so there were a lot of problems relating to, maybe kids fitting in for the first time because they were like new kids on the block. And so there may have been, although I was not aware of a lot of it, a lot of friction within the community between, the various ethnic groups and the like. And every once in a while you'd see, Brentwood in the paper. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, we didn't get a very good reputation with Newsday. But
that's true.
The situation was one of most of the people who I hung around with, the kids who I played with on the various teams, we didn't have any problems getting along, whether they were white, black, Hispanic, or whatever. And but there were some other kids the ones who would hang around after, it got dark and would wander the streets or whatever. I didn't hang out with any of those guys, but they were the ones who created the problems. And we had some of those then. When I graduated from Brentwood High School and came back 4 years later, I got what we later on referred to as a stress interview, where, George and Tommy and Ed, would ask you, what would you do if while you're teaching, a student said to you, F you, And of course, everybody would use that kind of term to some degree or another, and, when they're around with their friends, for the machismo or whatever, but you would never do that in polite company or in professional company. And so when he did that, he asked me that question. I was like kind of taken back. And I said, well, I don't think I would be able to deal with that too well. And I found out later on that George didn't want to hire me because he thought I was a little bit too uptight about it. And, over the years, I've been, kind of like, I've been accused of, I don't know, whatever way you want to put it, of being very strict and, overly sensitive about certain issues. But, if I asked you to do something, I expected you to do it, and I would talk to students. And Ruth convinced him to hire me. And, after I came on board with George and Tommy and I worked with them, they thought it was a good move, and I guess I panned out all right. But
yes, I guess
at first they were not going to hire me because they thought the answer I gave them says, well, I don't know, I can deal with that. I'd have to, sit them down and say, look, this is not the way you talk to teachers. Because when I was growing up, I was always taught to respect my elders.
There was a time that we both remember when that language being used in that setting was just beginning to occur. And it wasn't just here, it was police officers having to deal with it. It was any authority symbol in the society, and it was a new thing. Today, I dare say it's not new anymore.
So to the answer to the question, what I was lacking when I was in college being taught to become a teacher was something that would be able to get you to deal with that effectively.
Yes.
And of course, now we have all kinds of courses that are going to be able to address that issue. But back then, that was probably missing, the most glaring weakness in my preparation. But then, of course, it was something that was just developing, so it was hard for schools to, to prepare for it.
Former students, do you keep in contact, or do you hear from people every once in a while?
Over the years, I consider them part of my extended family. Some of them have turned out to be very successful in one area or another, and they come back and they look for you to say hello and to, show you pictures of their family and things like that. Yeah. And I still keep in contact with several of them, sending Christmas cards back and forth, over the years. Unfortunately, it's primarily been the athletes. Unless you have an unusual bond with a student in a classroom, when you're a biology teacher, you don't usually have that bond by the time they graduate, because you usually get them when they're in 10th grade. If I taught physics, it would be a different situation. Or if I taught a senior level course, but because of the nature of the job, most 10th graders, by the time they become 12th graders, the most recent impression is usually the most lasting impression. But I did have several other students that, over the years who I had them when I had them in 10th grade, or others when I had them in chemistry in 11th grade, who would come back. And, it's always very, very gratifying, as you know.
Oh, sure.
God knows when we first started, the pay wasn't very great, but the satisfaction that one got, the personal satisfaction that one got from, talking to the young men and women who would come back to see you, very, very gratifying.
Do you have any connection with former teachers of your own then, other than the ones that you work with over the year? Are there any of the people?
Dick Simmons, he was my coach, and of course we have a very common interest in track and field. We see him regularly. As a matter of fact, in 8 days we're going to get together for the second annual Dick Simmons picnic. Last
Really?
year we got together the
Neat.
guys from the track team over the years that Dick coached, and we got together at Heckscher State Park.
Oh, that's
And
neat.
so we're
Great.
going to have our second annual Heckscher State Park
Eli,
hockey mat number 4.
That's something to look forward to. Great.
Yes.
And it's a tradition that is only in its infancy.
That's right.
I guess it's going to continue.
Yes.
Sure. Did you at any point become, I know that you were a member of BTA and have been a member of the organization throughout your teaching tenure. Did you become active at any point in your career? Were you
In
ever?
BTA?
Yeah. Were you ever?
In my first 2 or 3 years when I was at the junior high level.
Now, this is even before you were tenured.
Oh, yes.
First 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a piece
yeah.
of courage for you.
Yeah. Well, I was unaware of the fact that, there was a problem. Of course, there are a lot of Bill Bernstein stories that we could tell
Yes.
about, the problems that people might have in becoming involved with a union, pre-tenure. But, I didn't, see myself as a rebel rouser.
Bill Bernstein was a fellow who taught in high school and was
very active in the union.
and was dismissed.
I don't think he was granted tenure.
Right.
And I never knew what the, specifics of it were other than what I would hear in faculty rooms. But I understand his political,
posture or whatever.
his posture, his way of doing things. I guess.
Tenure is once again under attack as we speak, and we're living through another period when it has become a political issue, even though it probably has very little to do with politics. It's an issue of academics and rights, individual rights. But there are these cycles that we watch. If you stand and watch the parade long enough, you see it all. But you're starting to say about your own involvement or participation. I take it as a coach, you really didn't have much time to do a lot of other things. If you were working a part-time, you were doing other work. By the way, was there anything other than the summer school, or rather, you mentioned? I didn't mention summer school, but I did that also in the summer. I did the night school at night for many years. So there was no time for any other part-time work then? There's only so many hours in a day. That's right. I did the coaching after school, and 2 nights a week I would do the evening high school. And I couldn't wait for Friday morning to come. Boy. Because I knew I didn't have to go to work Friday night. Were there individuals that were involved in the union or BTA and that you admired or can look back and remember them for their contributions? Of course, the first one that comes to mind is Guy DiPietro. Tragic loss for Brentwood. Yes. At one point in my career, I contemplated moving to another district because the opportunities I was looking for in terms of coaching and doing some other things I wanted to do weren't available. And Guy was the superintendent of schools at the time, and I went to him and I asked to speak to him, and he asked, of course, through Mrs. Villar what the reason was. And I said, just some advice I need about some personal things. And, of course, but Guy, being the class guy that he was, gave me his 10 or 15 minutes. And when I told him what I had in mind, he said, well, look, Eli, whatever you think you do, you have to do, for your own benefit and for the benefit of your family in terms of advancement and so forth. But why would you leave? You're pure Brentwood. Those were his terms. You're pure Brentwood. And, he was a man who was very highly respected, not just among his peers in terms of teachers or administrators, but in the community as a whole, in Brentwood and in his own community in Dix Hills. And it was truly a sad day when he passed away. It certainly was. So he was by far the most influential. This being 1998 will be the year of your retirement. What's the official date, by the way? When does it happen for you? I think it's the 25th, Thursday, a week from yesterday. What's your plan? Well, I really don't know what I'm going to do in terms of a full-time job. Okay. You mean you're actually thinking that you might entertain
Oh
the
yeah,
thought of okay.
I thought that maybe I might try, you know, other avenues, so to
There you
speak.
go. Okay.
So try something new for for a change. Try a new type of environment, and who knows what the future will bring.
Okay.
But I'm not going to stop working, and of course, I'll continue doing the coaching.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Obviously. Yeah. What are you most proud of in terms of your own professional accomplishment?
I think that I look over the years, what I've been able to accomplish in working with young men and women. The idea that one should not compromise one's integrity, for the sake of expediency. I've often felt that sometimes some of the things that we were asked, to do based upon what it said in the syllabus or, what it said in one other manual or another, was not really what was best for the kids. And so, I've always tried to give them what they wanted, they being, our superiors. But, at the same time, trying to make sure that, after they left here, the kids that would go out into the big blue marble, as it were, would be able to deal effectively with what it is they have to do on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
Working with a microscope, or learning how to handle a scalpel and a probe, and doing a dissection, may not necessarily be their life's work, but the thinking processes that you got to go through and helping to develop some of these skills are the things that we would hope that they would be able to walk away with and apply in other areas other than just working with a scalpel or working with a microscope.
As a teacher of biology for so many years, you must also appreciate how the metaphor that is used today to describe almost everything is a biological metaphor. I mean, even computers, they talk about viruses and
yeah, that's
growing the
interesting.
economy. And,
there are a lot of different terms that, are used to give life, so to speak.
Rather than the industrial model that has become a biological model.
There are a lot of terms that are used to animate, certain processes or certain things.
Yes.
But I guess maybe that's just our way of being able to make things, more believable for the kids. The whole idea of, analogies, although is something in your mind, if you can, make a picture.
Make a picture.
Yeah. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and the analogies flow a little easier.
Do you remember what you made your first year?
$5,900.
Before taxes.
Before taxes. $226.92 every 2 weeks.
Oh boy, that's etched into some neuron someplace. Yes. Why did you decide to retire now? I mean, I recognize that there was a state incentive that had to play a part. But what else was involved?
My health. I have high blood pressure. Okay. I've had it for a while. It's something that after a while, you have to make a decision as to, how much more you think you can do.
Yes.
And when it comes to the point where you think you've done as much as you can do, then maybe it's time to try something else, something with a little bit less stress.
Or at least something over which you can control the stress, or you have the controlling.
I try to tell the kids who are dealing with stress in their lives with their peers, or, the people who confront them in the halls or outside of school, whatever, that you should try to worry about the things over which you have some control. Things of which you have no control, you shouldn't worry about, because there's nothing you can do about it anyway.
Good advice.
And, some of the younger teachers as well. And I've had to learn that lesson the hard way. And, for many years, I would, be stubborn and try to will, things to happen, even though I knew that, I was fighting a losing battle.
I can identify.
Not the quitting type. So, after a while, unfortunately, age and experience teach you that, you have to learn how to pick and
Yes.
choose your battles, because it's not who wins the battle, but who wins the war.
There's not enough energy after a while. They
Mhm.
just.
So, if you can't do anything about it,
What's given you the most pleasure professionally over all of these?
the most pleasure has been, having the students come back and seek you out, whether it be students that I had in the classroom or
Yeah.
boys that I had on the track team.
Yes.
Just this afternoon, I was picking up some lunch at a local Puerto Rican restaurant, and one of the students who walked in, David Padilla, as he was walking up, I extended my hand to him and I shook his hand, and he started to laugh. He said, "Mr. Acosta." I said, "David, how are you?" And, it was pleasant. And, he would put his arm around my shoulder and kind of gave me a hug, and,
Nice.
without showing too much emotion, because, a lot of your Hispanic males don't want to show, too much emotion. It's not, I think, cool. It's not machismo to, to hug and kiss like the Europeans do. And, but David, although he wasn't the success I thought he could have become, has still managed to, make it
Neat.
And
speaking of Puerto Rican restaurants, you remember R.O.B.S Luncheonette?
Yep, the place I was with is right next to R.O.B.S Luncheonette, La
Yeah.
Lechoneta. Yeah, R.O.B was.
That was an institution for a
Yes,
lot
he
of
was.
people.
He was one of my role models when I first started working.
Is
As a
that
matter of
right?
fact,
Got a story for me?
yeah, the first job I had in Brentwood, other than delivering newspapers for Newsday, was working in R.O.B.S Luncheonette. I was at the store one time, and he was doing some things. Pete Galinda, you may remember.
Yes.
He worked for R.O.B behind the counter. R.O.B was doing some work. He needed some help behind the counter, and I was in the store. He said, "Eli, would you mind helping me?" I said, "Sure, why not?" And, he asked me what to do, and I did it. He told me what to do, and I did it. And, at the end, he told me to make myself anything I wanted to eat, and then gave me the money. I said, "This is a lot of money." He said, "It may be a lot of money for you, but it really isn't a lot of money. I'm getting off cheap."
Wow.
So, I mean, he wasn't trying to shortchange me or
That's
anything, but, I was unskilled. So, but it was a lot more than I expected. And it wasn't anything really significantly less than what he was paying the people who were working there regularly. So,
yeah.
But
he was one, as I recall, he was one of the people who, when he closed his business, he went back to Puerto Rico. But then I heard recently that he has.
No, I didn't know.
Back here.
I thought R.O.B was Jewish. Maybe you're thinking about Gus Rodriguez?
I'm thinking of Gus Rodriguez.
Yeah, Gus. Yes, Gus. Gus worked for R.O.B, and he worked in his check cashing business later on also. When R.O.B closed the Luncheonette on the corner where the car wash is now,
Yes.
he opened up the check cashing business next door.
I didn't know that.
And
so then it was.
You're thinking about Gus Rodriguez.
I'm thinking of Gus.
Yeah, Gus.
And then came back again.
And then came back, right. Gus was a person who, was involved in coaching some of the baseball teams and softball teams that I played with when I was in Brentwood, during the summer growing up. And he was, somewhat of a role model for me also. He was a very decent man and, worked very hard for his family. And he and R.O.B, became an institution.
He did.
In Brentwood.
As we're talking, I'm thinking this is a very, very close community. There's a lot of community spirit and a lot of camaraderie among. There are names that I would mention. I have to throw on Manny Vidal, who was all very active in the Lions Club and had several children through the system.
Right.
Haven't seen him in a number of years, but I know that he is an example of one of the people that you
Yeah.
must have come
Yeah,
across.
I knew Manny. He had a collision place
Yes.
on Fifth Avenue, just
Bay
behind the
Brent
Bay Brent
Fender.
Collision or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
near where the precinct is.
Mhm.
And he was very active in, the local Puerto Rican community.
Yes.
And
Service organizations.
mhm. He did a lot for Brentwood.
Listen, if there's anything that you could have done differently, what would it have been? I mean, there may not be anything, but
Well, yeah, what I would have done was, and some kids talk about that, they fantasize in the classroom. And one time a kid asked me, this was, I think, in my second or third year teaching at the high school here. I was in the Sondling building. And one of the kids asked me, Mr. Acosta, if you could do it all over again, what would you do different?
Okay.
And I thought about that for a minute, and I said to them, what I'm going to tell you is going to seem like it's silly to you, or stupid even.
Mhm.
But if I had it all over to do again, knowing what I know now, I'd like to go back over my life and start all over in 7th grade. Because in 7th grade was when I first got involved with athletics on a team basis that was involved with a scholastic team through the school as opposed to just pick up games after school. Because in elementary school, that's all you had. Plus, you had in the summertime, you had Little League and stuff like that. But once school started in 7th grade, now you could have organized, teams. And of course, I would study harder.
Ah.
I wasn't, slow. I was better than average, but I didn't work as hard as I probably could have. And I didn't do too badly. I graduated 13th out of class of 226.
Oh.
So, but the use of time as you're growing up is one that,
You don't realize how fast it's
That's
moving
right.
until you start to
and
advance.
you don't realize how much more you could do.
Yeah.
And so I would probably still wind up becoming a teacher.
You're not
because-
sorry about that.
No, I'm not.
That's
No, I'm
wonderful.
not. I think I made the right choice. 3 years into teaching, I was actually my 4th year into teaching. I was working in the R.O.B.S building, my first year in the R.O.B.S building in 1969. And one of the guys I went to college with was working down in Puerto Rico for IT&T. And he had spoken to me about the possibility of joining him in working with IT&T. He was getting a promotion.
Mhm.
And I think I was making something like around, maybe $7,700 a year. And he was offering me a job paying almost twice that. But, it only involves, 2 weeks vacation, and it's a lot of this and a lot of that after work and entertaining clients.
Yeah.
And, I was tempted. I talked about it with my wife, and I was very, very tempted, but I never followed through because I would lose the opportunity of working with, the young people and coaching.
What are you going to miss the most?
From leaving Brentwood?
Yes. Leaving the classroom on a full-time daily basis.
Well, leaving the classroom on a full-time daily basis from Brentwood, what I'm going to miss the most probably is going to be the opportunity to work with, the staff that I worked with over many years, who I know are really very, very dedicated to their profession and to the kids in Brentwood in general. And working with the kids who, I've been able to make an impact with. Unfortunately, over the years, we learned that no matter how hard we try, there are just some kids that we just can't reach. And
it's an important realization to come to.
Yeah.
There are people who never, well, I shouldn't say never, who continue to try to reach even the most unreachable.
Yeah. We don't want to give up.
I know.
But after a while, you have to reach the point where you have to say to yourself, I'm giving 50% of my energy to 3 people here.
Yes.
And 50% of my other energy to the other 25.
Yeah.
And these are being held back because of the action of these 3.
Yes.
And so you have to start learning to make it 70-30 or 80-20.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate.
Yes.
But, after a while, you look at the concept, the greatest good for the greatest number.
Yes, exactly.
And it's the greatest good for the greatest number that I'm going to miss the most.
Is there something
kids.
that you can say that you're not going to miss?
What I'm not going to miss. I'm not going to miss. Probably that question is better left unanswered.
Okay. Okay. What would you like to have accomplished, Eli, that you feel that you couldn't in the time that you had? Talking about time to do things.
While at Brentwood in 32 years?
Yeah.
What I would have liked to have accomplished that I didn't accomplish would have been the establishment of an after-school activity for the kids, either involving sports or, a club where the kids could have actually used in conjunction with their academic responsibilities. For one reason or another, either there wasn't time or there wasn't space or there wasn't interest. But some schools, when you go away to games or track meets or whatever, the athletes will bring books with them and use that downtime to study. And that's something I tried to do to some extent when I first started coaching track and field with some of the kids I had. And I just was never able to do it for a variety of reasons. One was that we were always trying to raise funds because of the austerity problems that we had.
For so many years. Yeah.
And but on several occasions when we didn't have those problems, since our primary responsibility is in the classroom, when we had downtime either before practice or after practice, I would try to get the kids to say, instead of just hanging around and palling around with your friends, crack a book and, get a little head on your studies, even if you've done your homework, which of course most of the times they didn't do, but they would tell you they did it. And, but, unfortunately, it becomes one of those things which, it keeps getting put on the back burner because, it's not the most urgent thing right now.
Yes.
It kind of gets put on the back burner. And, on several occasions, I try to get something like that started with some of the kids on my team. And I just never really got it started. And I think when I look back at it, the one thing I would have liked to have done that I never got accomplished was something along those lines. A buddy system where if a kid's having a problem with a particular class, we could do that. We did that with several kids during the course of time, but I would have liked to have had the opportunity maybe to develop something like on a more formal basis.
What do you see in the immediate future for students in Brentwood, let's say? How do you think things are going to unfold?
Brentwood is a very interesting place to work. We have an awfully large number of opportunities that are available to kids. We have an excellent computer center. We have an excellent AP program. We have a very highly dedicated staff with a lot of the problems that we have in our community because of the lack of language skills, the lack of reading skills, because either people are new to this country or, people, come to Brentwood because they know they have a good program for handling, students with disabilities. Because of the large numbers of students we have that have all these special needs, I'm most impressed with what we're able to handle.
Absolutely.
And what we're able to deliver.
Yeah.
Considering how
The
relatively
volume.
poor we are, relatively speaking, as compared to other districts,
Yes.
in terms of the amount of money they spend per pupil and the large numbers of kids that we deal with that have these problems.
Yeah. Do you see all of these pressures and these changes necessitating some changes ahead in the profession itself? Or am I not phrasing that question correctly?
No, I think you phrased it well. Unfortunately, over the years, the educational establishment on the secondary level has become more and more of a social agency as opposed to just simply an educational one. We have social workers,
Yes.
we have peer mediators. Of course, we have guidance counselors to help with the academic portion, but frequently guidance counselors spend a lot of their times dealing with, personal problems which kids have. Our nursing staff, besides helping with the little cuts and bruises or the turn ankle that kids get, they often have to sometimes, deal with other problems that kids have that, of a personal nature, which they only feel comfortable with in speaking to somebody from the health profession. The administrators also, they have their hands full on a regular basis. If they earned 7 figures a year, they would not be overpaid. The amount of stress that I see in classroom teachers on a regular basis is high.
You're talking about administrators.
I'm talking about administrators now.
Okay.
Knowing the kind of person I am,
Yes.
I could never deal with that kind of stress on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And
I think this is a factor
very high level
that
stress.
is not acknowledged.
Oh no, not
sufficiently.
a lot of people think that
never heard
administrators,
anyone
they just
say
sit in
this.
the office and they try to hide this and that, and whatever their complaints are about, administrators, as a whole, have a very, very, very difficult job to do. Most of the times, my feeling is that both hands are tied behind their back. They have a blindfold on, and they're asked to go into the fray and solve the problems. I mean, that's kind of hard to do.
Yes.
And so, I don't envy them at all.
Is there anything that we've forgotten to talk about, or a question I should have asked that I neglected to or omitted? This is as much for family as it is for our own professional family. It's for your guys too. So if there's anything that
I would say primarily that, if you work hard, you work diligently, and you truly and honestly give it your best shot, okay? Anything that you endeavor that's legal, of course, morally and legal, will make you happy.
Yes.
And I think in life, as you go through life and you think about picking and choosing what it is you want to do, with your life and how you're going to live it, if you think about the fact that, you get what you pay for, and
be careful what you choose.
Be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. But if you work hard and you work diligently and you're honest and you go about things the way things should be done, America is a wonderful place to live. Like that commercial about God, I love this country.
Yes.
It's a wonderful place. I mean, better than any other place on earth, in my estimation. And we all have 24 hours in our days, and we shouldn't waste them, especially when we're young, because later on when you get to be older, you're going to look back and you're going to say, gee, I wasted that time. Yeah. Jim Sabatelli taught driver's ed and was a coach here for several years, passed away several years ago. He used to have a clipboard. On his clipboard, he used to have a saying about how youth is a gift of God and age is a work of art. And the gift that God has given us with our youth and our enthusiasm and our boundless energy and our seemingly indestructible, identity is one that is not to be wasted, but to be used, as wisely as we can use it, because it's going to be rude later on down the road. But if you take good care of yourself, try to keep the weight down, which I have yet to do.
Have to be conscious of.
And pick your spots carefully. I think good things will happen.
Eli, you mentioned Jim Sabatelli, and all of a sudden a memory of mine was triggered. I remember a teacher, Doc Schottner, who was here many years ago. I guess when
he came shortly after I left as a student,
okay,
and I was here while he was still here. I came back to Brentwood. He was still here.
And there were several trees that he donated that used to be alive in front of the Sonneling building before they paved that whole area. And I thought of the gift that he here had been a doctor that came in to teach later on. Listen, to wrap this up, I would like to go to the beginning and then come to the end. The beginning, when you started teaching, this country was facing a lot of issues, as it always is, but there were probably a few paramount issues that the country faced when you began teaching. And of course, education at that time was in Brentwood, was confronting critical issues. I want you to reflect a little bit about what they might have been then. And then you are now at a point of retirement, and you can look at the state of the country, the issues that face us today, and the issues that are facing the classroom teacher and education today. If you can comment a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap this.
Well, in 1966, the central issues in our society, if I remember correctly, primarily were the Vietnam War was getting heated up. Racial strife.
Yeah.
The military-industrial complex was, going from second gear into third gear. I think from the point of view of, academics, you had a lot of unrest on the college campuses.
Yes. Most definitely.
Kent State.
Yes.
There was a revolution beginning about the use and abuse of drugs.
True.
The flower children.
Growing awareness.
Right. And Dr. Timothy Leary, kind of took it to the extremes. A lot of things were in flux, and but some of the old ideas about mom, apple pie, and Chevrolet, so to speak, were still very evident in our culture. Everybody strove towards that to some degree or another. I know I did myself. I don't know if you remember Roy Horn.
Yes.
A music teacher.
Yes.
When I first started teaching at East Junior High, East Middle now, he had said something about the fact that middle class, American values aren't necessarily the values that we should be looking to strive in achieving when we're pulling ourselves up from the bootstraps. He was speaking primarily to myself, and I think maybe one or two other young teachers. I mean, Roy was at that time beginning to prosper in his own life, financially and otherwise, and he questioned to some degree some of the values that we were striving to make more money so we can buy more of this, we can buy more of that, a lot of materialism going on. And the comment he made about how middle class values weren't necessarily the end all and be all, that people should look a little bit beyond that, and I think what he was trying to tell us was that the mom and apple pie part and not the Chevrolet part.
Okay.
And how family should be more important. And
then we went through the 70s and the 80s.
That's right.
And now here we are at the end of the 90s.
And we're back to the same old idea again. How everybody's always striving hard to work hard to make more money, to do this, to do that. And there are some families which are choosing to earn less money and probably be happier as a family unit, and because that's really what's going to probably, get them through in the end.
Yeah.
And it's only something that, in maybe the last, 10 or 15 years, I've come to learn myself, to the extent that, when I get involved in coaching track and field and I speak to kids about what their responsibilities are, to themselves, to their family, to their school, and to their team, I tell them, look, in anything we do, family always comes first. And you should always strive to put your family first. When I talk to the athletes on my teams, family comes first, academics are second, everything else is third. And I tell them at the top of everything, make sure you put track and field. But
Yes. You're talking about reprioritizing our values.
Our values, precisely. And unfortunately, like the Pennsylvania Dutch saying goes, we grow too old soon and too late smart. And so what Roy Horn said those many years ago, I wasn't able to realize until maybe about, 10 or 15 years ago. But fortunately, 15 years ago, I was, still in my,
Yes, sure.
late 30s and early 40s. And, I was able to begin to start picking and choosing accordingly.
So the future then, where we are now and going into the future, if I read you correctly, you're saying America is at a spiritual crisis in terms of its priorities, and we need to education will be affected by that as we begin to reprioritize what's really important.
Well, I don't know if I would put it in terms of it being spiritual in nature, but the point that I'm trying to make is that in our society we have too much of a segmentation of the family unit.
Okay.
And to some extent I'm at fault for this because I coach a track and field team, and so when we have track and field meets on Saturdays, or on weekdays during the
conflicts,
week.
Yeah,
it creates
Yeah,
conflicts
sure.
with, sitting
Sure.
down at family dinner.
Oh, sure.
And, but I don't have any control over that.
No.
So it's not that I don't worry about it. Like I said before, you can't
Yes.
worry about what you can't control. But, I try to limit the influence that it's going to have, on their kids. And I tell them, family comes first. I sincerely mean that. And, I think about Roy Horn every once in a while.
That's
And,
nice.
I thank him in my own quiet sort of way for that value lesson. Middle class values are not all they're cracked up to be.
Well, I'd like to thank you in my own quiet way for spending the time to giving us so much of yourself. And all I can say is thanks, Eli.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Enjoyed it.